What's up, everybody? How's it going? You might have noticed things look a little different. The lighting's different. I'm actually not the one recording this tonight. Pastor James is. He's here right now in the room, silently, just sitting in a corner. Not in any creepy way at all. But we decided that we would try some new stuff, maybe try to make this look better and whatnot, and he's gooder at this than I am, so tonight, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things in the world ever, and that is fighting. You may have noticed that Pastor Aaron tends to be attracted to, and sometimes or many times run to conflict, because conflict is something that I find to be very exhilarating. And the reason why we're talking about conflict and fighting tonight is because if you have any kind of relationship with any kind of person on the planet, then at some point, no matter how good or bad that relationship is, you're going to have some conflict. And then you're going to have a fight. That's usually when I'm right about, yeah, I'm ready for this fight. I want to win this argument. I'm going to win this sucker into the ground. It's going to be awesome. But every single one of us is going to have conflict. But tonight I want to talk about a dude who was amazing at resolving conflict in a way that never brought any harm into relationships, but in fact always left those relationships stronger afterward. And that dude goes by the name of Jesus. And we're going to get started right off in Matthew chapter 20, verse 20. It's pretty easy, Matthew's 20:20. So you can pause and get there, or just listen to my beautiful voice read this to you. So here we go. Then the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a favor. "What is your request?" Jesus asked. She replied, "In your kingdom, please let my 2 sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." But Jesus answered by saying to them, "You don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink?" "Oh, yes," they replied, "we are able." The Bible makes it sound like they were very excited to do that, which is weird because I wouldn't find a bitter cup of suffering exciting. But anyway, here we go. Jesus told them, "You will indeed drink from my bitter cup, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. My Father has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen." When the other 10 disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant, which is a fancy way of saying they were going to fight. And they probably were already fighting at this point. But Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus was a master of resolving conflict, but he did it in a way that didn't invite division and pain into relationships. And often the result was a stronger bond than before the conflict began. So how did Jesus do it? How did he do this? How was he a master of resolving arguments and fights and conflicts? You have to remember, Jesus was traveling around with 12 dudes for 3 years. And if you get 12 dudes together and they're living together and working together and eating together and sleeping together and really doing everything together, no matter how tight those people are, eventually there's going to be fights and conflicts, and there's going to be arguments, there's going to be spats, and there's going to be fists thrown, and maybe some sharp elbows, and people aren't paying attention. And so they're dudes. It's just the way that it works. And so Jesus was a conflict master, and he did this. A lot of times when we think of Jesus and we think of conflict, we think of the verse when he said, "Turn the other cheek." So we think Jesus was non-confrontational, or that Jesus avoided conflict at all costs, and that's actually not true. Jesus dealt with conflict in only one way, and that was to deal with it head on. And so, if fighting is inevitable, and it is, no matter how much you do or don't like fighting, or even if you're indifferent to fighting, it's going to happen. You're going to have to deal with it. Jesus dealt with this stuff head on, and he was so good at it that I believe we need to learn from his example and learn how to fight. Because if fighting is something that you can't avoid, then there's got to be a right way and a wrong way to do it. And if we look at Jesus in the New Testament and how he handled conflict, we can see 5 things that he did to fight fair. Tonight's digital devo is called Fighting Fair. And so we're going to dive into those 5 things that Jesus did to make sure that he was always fighting fair right now. Number 1, and this isn't just spiritual meat, this is practical life meat that you guys can apply to your lives. And some of you are going to be just a little bit convicted with some of these that we talk about, because you're going to immediately see how you fight ugly instead of fighting fair. So the first thing we can do to make sure we're always fighting fair is to avoid name calling. Jesus never used names like stupid face and fart sniffers, or pee pee poopy drinking face, or like pukey pants, dum dums, pee pee breath, and things like that. Kerfuffle truffles and hog mollies. Jesus never used demeaning names when he referenced anybody that he was in a discussion or an argument with. And the reason why he didn't do this is because when you insult somebody, while that does feel really good sometimes to call somebody a jerk face when they're being a jerk to you, is when you do that, you immediately put somebody on the defensive and you potentially hurt their feelings. And then your conflict that you're in the middle of ends up becoming a next level conflict. It just makes things worse. It just escalates everything. And that's why you should avoid calling people names when you're fighting. If you want to call people names, go ahead. That's how you fight ugly. Number 2, you need to leave things in the past. Jesus kept all the conflicts that he was resolving in the present and pointed to the future. When we bring up past conflicts related or unrelated to the stuff that we're fighting about, it just dredges up feelings of shame, guilt, and embarrassment. And those feelings don't come from God. Quite the contrary, they come from Satan, and here's why. Whenever you feel guilty or feel full of shame or feel embarrassed, that makes you look backwards to stuff that you no longer have any control over, to mistakes and blunders and things that happen to you that you just can't control anymore because they happened, that's over and done with. But you still relive the pain of those moments every time you look back at them. That's why that stuff isn't from God. Instead, Jesus used conviction when he was resolving conflicts to keep everybody focused on the here and now, because conviction makes you look at the condition of your heart in that moment, and then it points you toward a future resolution where God is involved. So if you want to fight fair and you're fighting, stay in the moment. Number 3, avoid using words like always and never, because no matter how awful a person is, and no matter how bad they are at something, or no matter how ridiculous that they act on a normal basis, nobody ever falls into the category of always, and nobody ever falls into the category of never, because sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, and there can be an often in there as well. We have to remember that we're not always right, wrong, good, or bad, and we don't always never do or don't do something. Jesus didn't do this because, again, it would put them on the defensive. And when you're on the defensive, you're not listening, and you're not learning, and you're not resolving. Number 4, don't drag other people into your fights. Jesus addressed the conflict directly with the individuals involved. He didn't bring in others to back him up, and he stood on the merits of his own wisdom and took accountability for everything that we said. He didn't go to Judas and be like, oh man, Judas, you're really not handling the money so great, and Matthew over there really agrees with me, and he thinks that you're kind of being a gypsy and stealing from us. And the reason why he didn't do that is because even if that was true, even if Matthew didn't like how Judas was handling the money, then that potentially damages the relationship between Matthew and Judas, because every time they're together now, Matthew knows that Jesus put his name into his mouth to back up his argument, and now Judas, every time he's around Matthew, he's uncomfortable and he doesn't really like him very much, and then it just kind of, it blows up another relationship that doesn't need to be involved in the conflict. And the 5th thing that Jesus did to make sure he was fighting fair was he was never afraid to walk away. If you look in the New Testaments, there are plenty of fights that Jesus got into that he knew he couldn't win because the other party was too offended or too stubborn or too angry or too upset. Oftentimes, these encounters involved the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the day, and Jesus knew that they were either too angry, upset, stubborn, or spiritually immature to resolve that conflict peacefully. And so because of that, Jesus knew there was no way to win, and no matter what he did, so he would just walk away. Sometimes when we fight, we need to walk away because we or the other party are letting our emotions get the better of us. When we fight fair with each other, we keep the door open to healthy resolution. And when we fight ugly, when we call people names, when we bring up the past and failures and embarrassments of the past, when we bring other people into arguments that we don't need to, when we label people with always and never, and when we don't want to walk away because we feel like we have to win and things keep getting worse, when we fight ugly, we slam doors shut that God could use to make relationships stronger. We end up doing more harm than good. And I want to end with a little verse out of Luke chapter 9, verse 46, and this is what it said. Then his disciples began arguing about which of them was the greatest. But Jesus knew their thoughts, so he brought a little child to his side. Then he said to them, anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me also welcomes my Father who sent me. Whoever is the least among you is the greatest. Fighting is inevitable. No matter how hard we try to avoid it or run from it, we will eventually find ourselves in a fight whether we like it or not. So it's not an issue of choosing to fight or not. It's a choice of whether or not we will fight fair or fight ugly. And fighting fair isn't about who's right and who's wrong. It's about who's sitting on the throne in our hearts. So who's on the throne in your heart today? Is it you or is it Jesus? The next time you fight, you'll know the answer to that question, because if you fight ugly, then it's you who's been sitting on that throne all along. Look at the condition of your heart today and ask yourself, do I fight fair or do I fight ugly? And I want to encourage every single one of you to fight fair. Because fighting is something that you can't avoid. It's going to be a part of every single relationship you ever have. Fighting in relationships, fighting in and of itself is not necessarily a sin. It becomes a sin when we use it to call people names and to make people feel bad and to demean them and to make them feel shameful and make them feel embarrassed and make them feel worthless. And it becomes a sin when we incorrectly label people so we feel better about ourselves. It becomes a sin when we lose our temper and we let things escalate. Fighting is something that is going to be a part of your life whether you like it or not. So you have to remember there's a right way and a wrong way to fight. And if you want to fight fair and fight the right way, if you want to fight in a way that brings about resolution and fight in a way that strengthens the relationships that you have, then you need to fight fair like Jesus did. It's not about winning and losing. It's about bringing a conflict to a close and making sure a relationship is restored and stronger afterward. I love you guys. I know this quarantine life is making all of you crazy, but it's going to be over soon. So I can't wait to see you guys when that's all said and done. I'll see you soon.